How do you organize a global logistical network where the product is free to acquire, priceless to the consumer, but becomes toxic trash if you don't use it within 42 days? It is a riddle that keeps operations researchers awake at night. We are talking about a supply chain where the stakes aren't measured in quarterly profits or stock prices, but in human heartbeats. How do we ensure that a bag of O-negative blood is available the exact second a trauma patient needs it, anywhere in the country, without going bankrupt from waste? This is Critical Path, where we explore stories and innovations about our global supply chain that connect our world to your everyday life. Today, we are ditching the shipping containers and forklifts for something a little more organic. We are diving deep into what experts call the G-Passet, logistics of life and death. We are going to look at the hidden, high-speed, high-tech chess game played by the American Red Cross and blood banks around the world. It is a story about math, biology, extreme weather, and the absolute chaos of trying to manage an inventory that is literally living and breathing. Let's start with the basics. In the world of standard logistics, managing inventory is pretty straightforward. If you are Apple, and you manufacture a MacBook, you can stick that laptop in a climate-controlled warehouse for months. It doesn't get hungry, it doesn't get old, and it certainly doesn't die. You can make 1 million of them, stack them to the ceiling, and ship them whenever Amazon places an order. But human blood? Blood is a nightmare. It is a biological tissue with a relentless expiration clock. Red blood cells have a shelf life of exactly 42 days when stored in standard preservatives. That is it. After 6 weeks, it is garbage. And if you think that is tight, look at platelets, the sticky little guys responsible for clotting. They expire in a mere 5 to 7 days. Imagine trying to run a grocery store where the milk goes bad in a week, but the milk is also the only thing keeping your customers alive, and you have no idea how many customers are going to walk through the door on any given Tuesday. This is what operations researchers call the Perishable Inventory Problem. It is a specialized field dedicated to optimizing assets that lose their value over time. And unlike selling newspapers or bananas, the penalty for running out of stock in a blood bank isn't just lost revenue, it is potentially a lost life. This creates a massive conflict. You want to stock enough blood to be 100% sure you can save everyone, but the more you stock, the more you risk throwing away precious donations because they expired on the shelf. So why 42 days? Why can't we just keep it in the fridge longer? Well, welcome to the gross but fascinating world of the red blood cell storage lesion. That sounds like a horror movie title, but it is actually the scientific term for the biochemical decay that happens inside a bag of blood. When you donate blood, it gets chilled to between 1 degree and 6 degrees Celsius. As it sits there in the cold, its metabolism slows down, but it doesn't stop. The cells start eating up their energy reserves, specifically something called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. As the ATP drops, the cells start to lose their shape. A healthy red blood cell looks like a smooth discoid. Think of a nice round donut, without the hole punched all the way through. This shape lets it squish through your tiniest capillaries to deliver oxygen. But as they age in the bag, they get spiky. They develop these weird protrusions and turn into what scientists call echinocytes. Eventually they become rigid little spheres called spheroechinocytes. Try saying that 5 times fast. These rigid spheres cannot navigate your blood vessels, they get stuck. But the real killer is a molecule called 2,3-diphosphoglycerate, or 2,3-DPG. This molecule is the chemical negotiation tactic that convinces hemoglobin to let go of oxygen. As blood is stored, 2,3-DPG levels crash. Without it, the hemoglobin becomes sticky, for oxygen. It grabs onto the oxygen and refuses to let go. So if you transfuse that old blood into a patient, the cells might circulate, but they won't actually deliver the oxygen the patient needs. It is like mailing a package that the recipient can't open. The FDA set the 42-day limit because, at that point, at least 75% of the transfused cells will survive in the recipient for 24 hours. But there is a massive debate in the medical community about whether old blood near that 42-day mark, is actually dangerous. Some studies suggest it is linked to higher rates of organ failure and infection because of all that cellular garbage floating around in the bag. So we have established that the product is dying from the moment it leaves your arm. Now let's talk about the math used to solve this. At its core, blood banking is a sophisticated version of the news vendor model. Imagine a guy selling newspapers on a street corner. He has to decide how many papers to buy from the printer in the morning. If he buys too many, he is left with worthless paper at the end of the day. If he buys too few, he misses out on sales. In blood banking, the math is similar but way more stressful. The cost of having a shortage is considered infinitely higher than the cost of wasting a unit. You cannot put a price tag on a trauma patient bleeding out because the bank was empty. This leads to the perishable inventory paradox. To ensure a service level of 99.9%, meaning you almost never run out, you have to keep stock levels high. But because the inventory is perishable, keeping stock levels high guarantees you will have more waste. It is a cruel catch-22. The more you try to save lives by stocking up, the more life-saving units you end up throwing in the biohazard bin. To fight this, blood banks use inventory policies that look like algebra exams. They use things called S-1 S policies. Essentially, whenever the inventory drops below a certain reorder point, they trigger a replenishment. But the real trick is the discipline of first in, first out, or FIFO. You have to ensure that the oldest blood is used first, or you are doomed to a cycle of expiration. Now let's look at the physical journey of a blood donation, because it is a race against time involving 4 distinct echelons: collection, processing, testing, and distribution. It starts with collection. Since we cannot synthesize blood in a factory, at least not yet, we have to harvest it from people. This happens at donor centers, and those big, colorful buses called bloodmobiles. Bloodmobiles are great for reaching people in the suburbs, but they introduce a time problem. The blood needs to be processed within 24 hours to be viable. If a bloodmobile sits in a parking lot for 12 hours collecting donations, those first bags are getting dangerously close to the deadline before they even move. To fix this, regional centers use a Gomri shuttle system. The bloodmobile stays put, acting like a stationary factory, while a smaller, faster shuttle vehicle zips back and forth between the bus and the lab all day long. This keeps a continuous flow of fresh, warm blood hitting the processing center, rather than one giant batch arriving at midnight. Once it hits the lab, the real magic happens. Operations researchers realized long ago that transfusing whole blood is inefficient. Why save one life when you can save 3? So, they put the bag in a centrifuge and spin it until it separates into 3 components: red blood cells, fresh frozen plasma, and platelets. This is a strategic masterpiece, but it triples the logistical complexity. Now, instead of managing one product, you are managing 3, and they all have different needs. Red blood cells need a fridge at roughly 4 degrees Celsius and last 42 days. Platelets need to be kept at room temperature, about 20 to 24 degrees Celsius, and they constantly need to be agitated or shaken so they don't clump, and they only last 5 to 7 days. Plasma? You can freeze that solid at minus 18 degrees Celsius, and it lasts a year. So now, the blood bank manager is juggling 3 different ticking clocks across 8 different blood types: A positive, A negative, B positive, and so on. That is 24 distinct inventory buckets to monitor from a supply stream that is totally unpredictable. You never know who is going to walk onto the bloodmobile today. This is where the national chess game comes in. Blood is a national resource. You cannot manage it in silos. If Los Angeles has a surplus of O negative, but Atlanta is running dry because of a massive pileup on the highway, the system has to know. The American Red Cross operates a national network that moves blood across the country to balance the scales. They don't just react to problems, they predict them. They are using advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning models, like XGBoost and long short-term memory networks. These aren't just buzzwords, they are saving lives. These algorithms analyze hundreds of variables: historical hospital usage, surgical schedules, national holidays, and even the weather forecast. Let's say the weatherman predicts a massive blizzard hitting the Northeast on Friday. The average person buys bread and milk. The Red Cross AI sees 2 things. First, donor turnout is going to crash because nobody wants to drive to a blood drive in a blizzard. Second, trauma incidents are going to spike because of icy roads and car accidents. The algorithm sees a drop in supply and a rise in demand days before the first snowflake falls. The system then preemptively ships blood from the south or the west coast into the northeast, positioning the inventory exactly where it will be needed before the roads close. These predictive models are incredibly precise. They can forecast the demand for specific blood types with an error margin of less than 10 units. This allows for just-in-time delivery, which reduces the amount of safety stock hospitals need to hoard, which in turn reduces waste. Another brilliant tactic is inventory rotation. This is basically a game of hot potato played with high stakes. Let's say a small community hospital in rural Ohio keeps a few units of O negative on hand just in case. But weeks go by, and nobody comes into their ER needing it. Those units are now short-dated, meaning they only have a few days of shelf life left. If they stay in that small hospital, they will likely expire and be thrown away. So the system flags them. Logistics teams pick up those short-dated units and rush them to a massive Level 1 trauma center in a big city, like Cleveland or Columbus. In a trauma center, the volume of patients is so high that they will almost certainly use those units within 24 hours. A single bag of blood might visit 3 different hospitals during its 42-day life, always being pushed toward the place with the highest probability of usage. It is an intricate dance designed to squeeze every ounce of value out of the donation. But what about the rare stuff? We are talking about the needle in the haystack challenges. Standard blood types like A and O are a volume game. Rare blood types are a precision game. A blood type is considered rare if it appears in less than 1 in 1,000 people. For patients with sickle cell disease who receive frequent transfusions, they develop antibodies that fight off standard blood. They need a perfect match. This is managed by the American Rare Donor Program and a database called REGGI, the Rare Erythrocyte Genotype and Group Information System. When a hospital has a patient with a weird antibody profile, they don't just check the fridge, they contact the Rare Donor Program. The program searches the national database for a donor with that specific genetic makeup. Sometimes, they have to call a donor and say, "Hey, we need you specifically, right now." Other times, they tap into the frozen reserves. Yes, you can freeze red blood cells for 10 years if you use a special glycerol solution and keep them at -65 degrees Celsius, but you cannot just thaw them and use them. They have to undergo a washing process called deglycerolization to get all the chemicals out. It takes hours. It is a logistical headache, but for a patient with a rare blood type, it is a miracle. Modern technology has made this easier with high-throughput genotyping. In the old days, finding a rare donor was manual and slow. Now labs can screen a single blood sample for 36 different antigens at once using automated DNA analysis. Once they find a rare donor, that person is flagged in the system forever. They become a known asset in the chess game. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room: money. We like to think of blood as a charitable gift, and the donation part is, but the processing? That is expensive business. The blood supply chain is capital intensive with terrifyingly low margins. A typical regional blood center has fixed overhead costs that can exceed $74,000 a month before they collect a single drop. We are talking about payroll for phlebotomists, massive electricity bills for industrial refrigerators, fleet maintenance for climate-controlled trucks, and expensive testing kits to ensure the blood doesn't have HIV or hepatitis. Because the fixed costs are so high, blood banks rely on volume to break even. But remember the paradox? If they collect too much volume to cover their costs, the blood expires, and they lose money on waste. They have to operate in a tiny sweet spot. If demand from hospitals drops by even 15%, a blood center has to immediately slash its budget, cut marketing, and consolidate routes to avoid burning through cash. Economists and health systems measure the value of this system using quality-adjusted life years, or QALYs. In places like the UK, the health system is willing to spend £20,000 to £30,000 to save 1 year of high-quality life. This economic metric is what justifies the millions of dollars spent on these supply chain technologies. If a better algorithm can save 100 units of blood, that translates to real human years saved, which makes the investment worth it. The resilience of this system is constantly tested by crises. And interestingly, the 2 biggest crises of the 21st century caused opposite problems. First, let's look at September 11, 2001. After the terrorist attacks, the American public was heartbroken and wanted to help. The only thing they knew to do was donate blood. In the 2 months following the attacks, 500,000 more units were collected than usual. It was an overwhelming display of patriotism and love. But tragically, there were very few survivors from the attacks who needed transfusions. The supply chain was flooded, with 500,000 extra units that had nowhere to go. Tens of thousands of those precious gifts hit their 42-day expiration and had to be incinerated. It was a wake-up call for the Red Cross. They learned that during a disaster you have to manage the donor surge. Now they use appointment-based systems to spread those donations out over months, matching supply to actual clinical need. Then came COVID-19. This was the inverse problem. Fear of infection and lockdowns caused donor turnout to plummet. Before the pandemic, the Red Cross tried to keep a 7 to 10 day buffer of inventory. During the height of COVID, that dropped to a terrifying one-day supply. The system was running on fumes. They had to switch to a hyper-efficient, just-in-time model. Hospitals had to cancel elective surgeries, liver transplants, hip replacements, just to preserve that one-day stock for car crash victims and gunshot wounds. It proved that we need a centralized, national control tower for blood, because relying on fragmented regional banks during a pandemic is a recipe for disaster. So what does the future hold? How do we solve the perishable inventory problem once and for all? Technology is pushing hard. We are looking at the Internet of Blood. Imagine sticking an IoT sensor on every single bag. It tracks temperature, vibration, and location in real time on a blockchain ledger. If a truck's AC fails and the blood gets too warm, a smart contract instantly flags the units as unsafe and automatically orders a replacement shipment from the nearest hub. No humans needed. It automates the chess game. But the real holy grail? Synthetic blood. Scientists are working on lab-grown red blood cells derived from stem cells. If they crack this code, we could manufacture blood in a factory, just like we make MacBooks. No 42-day expiration, no reliance on fickle donors, no risk of shortages. It would turn a biological nightmare into a standard manufacturing supply chain. Until then, we are stuck with the logistics of life and death. It is a system where the warehouse is a moving truck, the inventory is alive, and the customer is fighting for their life. It is a high-wire act performed every single day by mathematicians, nurses, and truck drivers, all working together to ensure that when a surgeon extends their hand, the blood is there. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive into the red rivers of logistics. I want to hear from you. We talked about the ethical and logical dilemma of the perishable inventory paradox, stocking more to save lives but knowing it creates more waste. If you were running the algorithm, would you prioritize zero waste, or would you accept the financial hit of expired blood to ensure you never, ever ran out? Let me know your strategy in the comments below. Thanks for listening and watching. Please like and subscribe, and make sure to check out our other videos about the global supply chain.